She was standing by the window when it happened. The last thing I expected was her hand, firm, deliberate, grabbing my collar before I could step out the door. "Stay with me instead." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of tone that slips under your skin, quiet but impossible to ignore. It started 2 months ago, at the small book repair shop I work at downtown. A narrow place that always smells faintly of paper dust and old glue. Her sister, Alina, had been coming in to get her vintage books restored, slim, romantic novels that looked as fragile as the handwriting in the margins. The older sister, though, she only came once. That day, she walked in like she was both out of place and perfectly aware of it. Not just older in presence. Crisp blouse, dark jeans, the faintest trace of perfume that smelled like citrus and something deeper. She watched me repair the spine of a book through the glass counter for a while before speaking. "You're patient," she said. I looked up. "With books, yeah. People, not so much." Her mouth curved. Not a smile exactly, but something close. Patience with one thing usually means you're lying about the other. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't. The next few times she came, she was just there to pick up her sister. Alina would run late, and I'd find myself making small talk to fill the quiet. Nothing flirtatious, just ordinary, uneven conversation that somehow felt too careful. She'd ask about my work. I'd ask about her day. She'd pretend she wasn't tired. I'd pretend I didn't notice. There was always something restrained in her, like she was holding back a thought mid-sentence, or waiting for someone to stop her. Even the way she stood, arms crossed loosely, thumb rubbing at her ring, felt like a habit formed from saying no too many times. And me? I kept wondering why I noticed so much about someone I barely knew. Last night, Alina and I were at her place, a quiet, soft-lit apartment that smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. She went to change after spilling wine on her dress, leaving me alone in the living room with her sister. The silence was too heavy to be casual. She was sitting on the couch, reading something on her phone. The light from the lamp drew a faint gold line along her cheekbone. When she looked up, I felt caught, like I'd been staring too long or too often. "You're good for her," she said softly. I tried to laugh it off. "You sound surprised." "I am." She set her phone down. "Alina doesn't usually bring people home. Maybe I'm temporary." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment. Maybe not. I didn't know how to respond, and maybe she didn't either, because we both looked away at the same time. Then Alina called from the other room, her voice distant. I started to move toward the hallway, to leave, to breathe, when I felt it. Fingers at my collar. "Stay with me instead," she said again, barely above a whisper. Her hand dropped almost immediately after, as if she hadn't meant to do it, as if the words had escaped her mouth without permission. The air between us shifted, heavier, sharper, charged with something neither of us could name. When Alina came back, smiling, nothing looked different, but everything felt different. I've replayed that moment 100 times since. The warmth of her hand, the quiet authority in her voice, the way my pulse stumbled when she said it. And the worst part is, I can't decide if I want to forget it or hear her say it again. It wasn't supposed to be awkward. She'd called that morning, said one of her shelves had collapsed, scattering books across her apartment floor. Alina was out of town, and she didn't want to bother anyone else. So there I was, kneeling on her living room carpet, holding a screwdriver and trying not to stare too long at the way she tucked her hair behind her ear every few minutes. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and wood polish. The afternoon light fell through half-drawn curtains, painting soft lines across her face. She looked tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep, the kind of tired that sits somewhere deeper. "Sorry you had to come all the way here for this," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I could have managed." "Maybe," I said, adjusting a bolt. "But it's easier with two hands." Her laugh was quiet, a short exhale that sounded almost like disbelief. "You always say things that sound simpler than they are." I didn't mean to look up just then, but when I did, she was watching me. Not the kind of watching that expects an answer, the kind that waits to see if you'll flinch under it. She turned away first, pretending to check the clock. "You want coffee?" "Sure," I said, though I already had a cup beside me. In the kitchen, she moved slowly, deliberate, precise. Every motion looked rehearsed. The way she wiped the counter twice though it was clean, the way she stood too long waiting for the kettle to boil. It was like she needed her hands busy to keep her thoughts still. When she returned, she handed me a mug and sat down across from me. "You and Alina, you're good?" "Yeah," I said carefully. "She's easy to be around." She nodded, but her eyes flickered, just once and gone. "That's good." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just unsteady. She tapped the rim of her cup, the soft clink of porcelain filling the air. I caught myself staring at her hands, the faint veins along her wrist, the small scar near her thumb. I wondered what she'd been like 10 years ago, before the exhaustion settled behind her smile. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked without thinking. "Miss what?" "Whatever made you stop believing people mean what they say." She froze, cup half raised. Then, a small breath. "You shouldn't say things like that." "I didn't mean, I know," she interrupted gently, eyes still lowered. "That's what makes it worse." For a moment, she looked fragile, not in the way of someone who might break, but someone who hasn't let herself rest in years. I wanted to say something, anything, to pull her out of that quiet. Instead, I reached for one of the fallen books, brushing dust from the cover. "This one's torn," I murmured. "I can fix it." She looked up then, and for the first time, the distance in her eyes cracked, just a little. "Thank you," she said softly. I smiled, pretending not to notice the tremor in her voice. The kettle whistled again from the kitchen, shrill, insistent, but neither of us moved. Her fingers grazed mine as she reached for the book, and the contact was so brief it could have been an accident. Except she didn't pull away right away. And in that small hesitation, something unspoken passed between us, quiet, fragile, and undeniably alive. It was raining hard that night, the kind that turns the city into a reflection of itself. I'd stopped by to drop off the repaired books, nothing more. She'd texted earlier, a simple "if you're nearby, you can bring them tonight." I almost didn't go, but something in the message felt open. Her apartment was dim when she let me in, warm light spilling from a single lamp by the couch. A record hummed low in the background, soft, old jazz. She wore a sweater I hadn't seen before, sleeves pushed to her elbows. The air smelled like rain and coffee and something faintly floral. "Sorry," she said, brushing a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "I didn't realize how late it was." "It's fine," I said, setting the books on the table. "I was out anyway." A lie, I wasn't. She poured us tea, though neither of us seemed thirsty. The storm outside kept pushing against the windows, thunder folding into silence. Every time lightning flashed, her eyes seemed to flicker with something she wasn't saying. "I read the one you fixed," she murmured after a while. "You even mended the loose binding. Couldn't leave it half done. Must be nice," she said, "to finish things." The words landed heavier than they should have. I watched her fingers trace the rim of her cup, slow, distracted. She looked tired again, not just from the day, but from carrying too much alone. "Was that about the book?" I asked quietly. She looked up. "I'm not sure." There it was again, that quiet honesty that slipped out of her when she wasn't guarding herself. The thunder rolled closer, rattling the shelves. She laughed softly, almost to herself. "I used to love storms. Now they just make me restless." Without thinking, I said, "You don't have to be alone during them." She blinked, once, slow, and then looked at me for a long moment. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the air too still, too close. But then her phone buzzed on the counter. A man's name lit the screen. She didn't answer right away, just stared at it, jaw tight, breath uneven. Finally, she turned it face down and sighed. "Some things don't stay finished, no matter how neatly you close them." I nodded, though I didn't understand, or maybe I did, and didn't want to. She leaned back on the couch, eyes closed. "You ever feel like something's starting and ending at the same time?" I wanted to say yes, but I didn't. Instead, I sat beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the warmth between us. The record clicked at the end of its side, the needle scratching faintly. Neither of us moved to stop it. Her hand brushed against my knee, barely there, and lingered. My breath caught. Then, just as I turned toward her, The phone buzzed again, sharp and relentless. She opened her eyes, pulled her hand back slowly, and whispered, almost apologetically, "You should go." I stood there for a moment, heart thudding, rain hammering the glass. I wanted to leave. I didn't. And in that half-second of hesitation, I realized the distance between us was the only thing holding us together. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. She stopped by the shop near closing. No call, no text, just the sound of the doorbell cutting through the soft hum of the old ceiling fan. Her hair was slightly damp, like she'd walked through light rain again. She looked around the room before her eyes settled on me, as if confirming I was still there. "I didn't mean to come here," she said. "I just didn't want to go home yet." I nodded. "You can stay." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I was cleaning the counter, pretending to focus on the same spot for too long. The shop was quiet except for the slow tick of the wall clock. After a while, she leaned against the counter beside me. "You don't ask questions, do you?" "Not if someone doesn't want them. And if I did, then I'd still wait for you to ask me back." She let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "You're too careful." "Maybe," I said, "but not careful enough to stop thinking about you." The words came out before I could stop them. She turned her head slowly, eyes meeting mine, calm, unreadable. "Don't," she said softly. "Please don't say things like that." "I'm not trying to say anything," I murmured. "I just don't know what this is anymore." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't move away. Neither do I. We stood there, side by side, the silence between us pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't heavy, it was full, too full. She looked down at her hands, her voice low. "Do you ever think we made a mistake?" "In what?" "In not stopping earlier." Her fingers brushed the counter's edge, tracing the grain of the wood. She looked smaller somehow, like the effort to stay composed was costing her more than she could admit. "I thought I could keep it simple," she continued. "Just conversation. Just something quiet. And now," she met my gaze again. "Now it's not quiet anymore." The clock ticked. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the back, a book slid off a shelf and hit the floor, soft and sudden. Neither of us moved to pick it up. "What are we doing?" she whispered, barely holding the question steady. I swallowed hard. "I don't know, but it doesn't feel wrong." Her breath caught, not a gasp, just a stillness, like she was deciding whether to run or stay. "That's what scares me," she said. For a moment, I thought she would leave. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice trembling just enough to betray her control. "You make it too easy to forget who I'm supposed to be." I didn't reach for her. I couldn't. The space between us had turned sacred, fragile, and untouchable. She took one slow breath, then said, almost to herself, "If I stay another minute, I don't trust myself to leave." She came back the next evening. Not for books this time. She said she had something for me to look at when I opened the door. She was holding a small, worn envelope. The edges were softened, the ink faintly smudged by time. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. She just held it out like she was returning something that had never belonged to her. "I found this while cleaning," she said quietly. "It's not really mine, but I thought you should see it." I took it carefully, glancing at her before sliding out the folded paper. The handwriting was uneven, hurried. "A letter. You made it easier to breathe for a while. That's all I wanted to say before I go." The signature was faint, almost unreadable. But the name, it was close enough to mine that I felt something twist inside. I looked up. Who wrote this? Her lips parted, but no words came. Then, after a pause that felt longer than it should have, she whispered, "Someone I shouldn't have loved." The rain had started again outside. It was softer this time, steady, rhythmic, like it didn't want to interrupt. She turned away, crossing her arms. He was younger. Kind. Too kind. He didn't know what he wanted, and I thought I could protect him from the world. Her voice cracked a little. Turns out I just made him smaller. I didn't know what to say. I just watched her, the faint tremor in her jaw, the way her eyes stayed fixed on the window as if the streetlights outside could keep her steady. "How long ago?" I asked finally. 10 years. I nodded slowly. "And you think I remind you of him?" She met my eyes then, and for the first time, there was no guard, no mystery. Just fatigue, and a kind of grief I didn't have a name for. "At first, yes," she said. But now it's worse. Why worse? Because now I know you're not him, she said, her voice breaking the air like something fragile shattering quietly. And I keep forgetting that. Silence. The kind that changes everything. I set the letter down on the counter, unsure whether to touch her or step away. The clock ticked again, reminding me that time hadn't stopped, even though it felt like it had. You're not supposed to see me like this, she murmured, rubbing her temples. You're supposed to stay untouched by all the things that broke me. I wanted to tell her she wasn't broken, that she was the only thing in my life that felt painfully, beautifully real. But I didn't, because maybe that would have been crueler. Instead, I said softly, maybe we're both carrying ghosts. Her eyes flickered, not surprise, not relief, just a quiet recognition. Then she whispered, almost like she was saying it to herself. And maybe that's why we keep finding each other in the dark. The shop was closed, but she was still there. She'd come after hours again, said she just wanted to drop off a book for repair, though the book stayed forgotten on the counter. We sat on opposite stools, the faint hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence between us. Outside, the city was blue with evening, that hour when everything looks softer, almost forgiving. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There wasn't anything left to hide behind. No excuses, no pretense of coincidence. Finally, she said, I think I kept coming here because it felt safe. You felt safe. I looked up, and now, her eyes lingered on mine. Now it doesn't feel safe anymore. I nodded. Me neither. A faint smile tugged at her lips, small, tired, but real. It's strange, isn't it? Wanting something you know will undo you. Her voice wavered just slightly at the end, and it did something to me. The way she tried to keep her composure even as the truth slipped out. I didn't move closer. I just stayed still, waiting for her to breathe again. When she finally did, it came out shaky. I told myself I wouldn't repeat the same mistake. I thought distance was a kind of control. Maybe it is, I said. Until it isn't. Her eyes softened. She leaned forward a little, elbows resting on her knees. Do you think we'll regret this? Whatever this is. I exhaled. I think we already do. That made her laugh quietly. One of those laughs that sounds more like surrender than amusement. She reached for her cup, fingers brushing mine by accident. Or maybe not by accident. Neither of us pulled away this time. Her hand was cold, trembling just slightly. I turned my palm so our fingers met properly, and she stilled. No words. Just that. The quiet understanding that something irreversible had already happened long before either of us admitted it. The fan hummed above us. Somewhere outside, someone locked their car, the sound echoing down the street. It all felt too normal for a moment that wasn't. I don't want to fix this, she whispered. For once, I don't want to make something right. I didn't answer. I just let my thumb trace the edge of her hand, slow and careful, like memorizing something temporary. She leaned her forehead against my shoulder, not romantic, not desperate, just tired. The kind of closeness that comes when two people finally stop pretending not to care. After a long while, she said, we don't owe anyone an explanation, do we? No, I murmured. Just the truth. And what's that? I thought about it. The rain, the silences, the near confessions, the way her hand fit against mine like it had been waiting there for years. That we didn't mean for this, I said softly. But we mean it now. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. The clock struck 9, steady and indifferent. Neither of us moved to turn off the lights. We just sat there, her hand in mine, the air still and honest, as if silence itself had finally decided to stay. It's been 6 months since that night in the shop. Sometimes, when I close up alone, I still catch the faint scent of her perfume on the counter. Citrus and ink and something I can't quite name. It's probably gone by now, but memory doesn't care much for facts. We don't see each other often anymore. Not by decision, just by the quiet drift that happens when two people finally stop orbiting something they can't name. She moved to a different part of the city, started teaching again. Alina and I ended things a few weeks after that night, gently, without blame. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about anyone. It was just time. I think about her sometimes, the way she held her coffee too long before drinking it, or how she'd fall silent right when the conversation got too close to truth. Back then, I thought I was reading her. Now I realize I was learning her language. All pauses and half-finished thoughts, the kind that said more than full sentences ever could. What surprised me most wasn't how it ended, but how it didn't really end. She didn't vanish from my life. She just became quieter inside it, a steady hum under everything else, like the echo of rain long after it stopped. One afternoon, a few weeks ago, she came by the shop again. Not to talk, not to linger, just to return a book I'd fixed months ago. She placed it on the counter, smiled faintly, and said, "You did a good job. It's held together." I wanted to say, "So did we." But I didn't. Instead, I nodded and said, "Books deserve second chances." And she said, "So do people." Then she left, quietly like always. That was the last time I saw her. I used to think love meant permanence, that you either stay or you don't, that closure meant something had to be finished. But now I think it's more like restoration. You can't make something new again, only help it keep existing a little longer. What she taught me, without ever trying to, is that some connections aren't meant to be resolved. They're meant to stay felt. Sometimes, late at night, when the shop is dark and the rain starts again, I catch myself reaching for my phone. Not to call her, just to remind myself she's still somewhere out there, drinking tea, fixing her own shelves, maybe thinking about the same storm. And that's enough. Because what we had wasn't about forever. It was about seeing and being seen in the small, quiet hours when no one else was watching. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?